The hockey world woke up to tragic news this morning, learning that Johnny Gaudreau and his brother Matthew were tragically killed in a crash in New Jersey on Thursday night. Hunter and I are going to remember both of their lives and careers on this edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp. You can follow me on Twitter at synonym for wet. Joined as always by my co-host, Hunter Hodes. You can follow him on Twitter. You can follow our show's account at LO_Penguins. We thank you for making this your first listener watch of the day because we're your team every day. And don't forget that we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts as well as YouTube. And before we get going today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. So now that that's all out of the way, I'm sure at this point, if you are listening to this show here on Friday, August 30th, you have heard the absolutely devastating and heartbreaking news out of New Jersey that Columbus Blue Jackets forward Johnny Gaudreau, as well as his brother Matthew, were killed in an apparent drunk driving accident. They were riding their bicycles along a certain road, and a driver struck them from behind, ultimately killing the both of them. So this segment, obviously, we know we are a Pittsburgh Penguins podcast, and that is our focus. But on a day like today, we're not going to talk too much about the Pittsburgh Penguins in this first segment, because when news like this happens, it's bigger than just one team. It's bigger than just one sport. It's about the person in the community that is the sport of hockey. And while we all certainly know that this sport, this game, and all of it has its flaws, it is an incredible community. I know that firsthand. Being a part of this show, our listener base is tremendous. It's a fantastic little community. And we figured with that in mind, it would be best to talk about Johnny and his brother Matthew and remember the careers that they had. Obviously, Gaudreau was part of the Columbus Blue Jackets, a Penguins rival, and he certainly had no qualms being part of that rivalry, beating the Penguins quite a few times and lighting them up quite a few times. His brother Matthew most recently played professional hockey in the 21-22 season with the ECHL's Worcester Railers. And this one is a tough episode to do because while I'm not going to pretend that I was a gigantic Johnny Gaudreau fan, obviously being a gigantic hockey fan, I was made aware of him after winning the Hobey Baker Award at Boston College. And then his eruption into the scene in the NHL, kind of breaking all of the norms in the NHL, because he was not a large hockey player. He was a quick, fast, talented guy. He went totally against the archetype that so many general managers and coaches were looking for in the 2010s, and he flew in the face of all of that. He was such a fun player to watch. He was such an incredible talent. And putting the hockey aside, if you were on social media today or reading any stories that came out from Calgary, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Columbus, you learned that this was a guy who absolutely understood he hit the proverbial lottery. He was a happy guy. He was gracious. He was a great teammate and friend. And he understood that he got paid a lot of money to play what is essentially a kid's game, and he lived that to its fullest. So with all that, Hunter, your thoughts on Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau?
They both did that, Pat. I also will say that was beautifully said overall, but just seeing so many great stories about Johnny and Matthew, the people they were off the ice, it goes beyond it all. Honestly, these two people were just awesome off the ice. They inspired so many people, and it absolutely just rocked me to my core this morning when I saw this news. I've watched Johnny Gaudreau throughout his entire career. I loved seeing what he did in Calgary, especially that 2014-15 season. One of my favorite memories of Johnny was game 3 against the Ducks, the second round series, Flames Ducks. And he scores the tying goal. And just seeing Flames fans go absolutely crazy. He electrified that crowd. He ignited that franchise that year because they had been waiting for playoff hockey to return since the 2008-09 season. That 14-15 season was the first time they made the playoffs since 08-09. They've been waiting for playoff hockey. He got them in there and had one heck of a moment in that game. And then also 21-22, the series winner against the Dallas Stars. Just what an unbelievable game winner. What an unbelievable season also for Gaudreau that year. People forget he had 40 goals and 115 points in 82 games that year. He was a top 10 player in the league that year. That's how good he was in his final season with the Flames. Those are two of my favorite on-ice moments of Johnny Gaudreau. Another one, he was still in Calgary at the time. He was actually visiting Columbus before he joined the Blue Jackets. And he's skating around doing his pregame routine, and he hears the cannon go off, and he jumps. He's like, what in the heck was that? You could tell by his facial reaction. That's another one of my favorite moments. But my heartfelt condolences go out to his family, his friends, the Columbus Blue Jackets organization, the Calgary Flames organization, in the entire NHL community as a whole. Also, we should say for Matthew, very good player for Boston College before he got into the ECHL and AHL. I continue to be absolutely devastated by this, gutted. I'm still kind of in shock as well. And we also should shout out Kevin Hayes and Sean Monahan. Sean Monahan, one of Johnny Gaudreau's best friends, seeing Gaudreau hug Monahan after that game winner in 2022 is still beautiful to this day. Also, seeing Kevin Hayes' post on Instagram, someone who has been through hell and back these last 3 years, Pat. I mean, he loses his brother, Jimmy, 3 years ago. He loses his best friend 3 years later. Johnny Gaudreau was dancing on Brady Tkachuk's shoulder during his wedding. I apologize if I'm a little emotional right now, but I just wanted to shout out both of those guys as well, considering how close they were to Gaudreau. But just a devastating tragedy. Again, my heartfelt condolences go out to the Blue Jackets organization, the Flames organization, Gaudreau's friends and family, and the NHL community as a whole.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add this to continue what you were saying about Kevin Hayes. And on a day like today, I feel like it's the right moment in time to remind people of this. And it's also to remind ourselves, me and Hunter on this show, this is, at the end of the day, entertainment. That's what sports are. We come to sports to be entertained. And yes, this season on this show, Hunter and I will critique this team. We will get upset about this team. We will, at some points, I guarantee, be unfair to some players. And this is not me saying that no matter what Kevin Hayes does this year, he gets a pass, because there will be games when he plays way past expectation, and there will be games where he performs well below expectation. But keeping this in mind, this is something I want to remind everybody one more time. At the end of the day, these are human beings who play this sport. Yes, they get paid to play a kid's game. Yes, we are fans who want to see them win. We want to see our teams win, and we want to see them be a part of that winning effort. And yes, they signed up for a career that puts them under an unbelievable microscope, to the point where goofballs like Hunter and myself can turn on microphones and critique them despite them being able to skate circles around us. But these are human beings at the end of the day. It's perfectly fine to criticize them, to critique them, to have disappointment in the way that they play for your favorite team. But like Hunter said, the absolutely unbelievable loss that Kevin Hayes has experienced over the past few years, keep that in the back of your mind when this season happens, It's not me saying you should never criticize him. It's not me saying you should never analyze his game, because this is, again, what he and everyone else in the National Hockey League has signed up for. But this is a guy who has been involved in part of some unbelievable tragedy over the past few years. So it'll be an extremely difficult year for him. And while I don't like speaking for Hunter, he said this to me before we hit record, and I'm going to echo that sentiment. Penguins fans, on opening night, when this team takes the ice for player introductions and Kevin Hayes' name is announced, treat it like it's Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
Let this man be welcomed into our town, onto this team, and let him know that we have his back, because I may only be 33 years old, but I am incredibly familiar with death and tragedy, and I can only imagine what this man's going through. And I know having that kind of reception in this city will only make it easier for him and help him be the best person and hockey player that he can be. But that will do it for this segment of the Locked On Penguins podcast. When Hunter and I return, we will talk more about the Pittsburgh Penguins. They have a lot of national games coming up this season, and we will dive into that and more right after this. But first, we're going to tell you about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. I will say this, I have the NFL Sunday Ticket through YouTube TV, and now that I've learned you can customize the quad box, oh boy, I'm going to have a lot of fun with it this NFL season. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, welcome back to the Friday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm Patrick Damp. That's Hunter Hodes. And boy, I know that the Pittsburgh Penguins have been struggling the past few years, not making the playoffs the last two, and kind of falling out of contender status among some of the best NHL teams. But apparently nobody told ESPN and TNT that, because the Pittsburgh Penguins this year will have 17, that's right, count them, 17 nationally televised games, tying them with the Edmonton Oilers and the Colorado Avalanche for the most games on national TV. And I'm pretty excited about this, because I'll say this, most of their national games that they're going to have this year are on TNT. And TNT has been doing a fantastic job with the hockey rights. So we get to see them on the Fun brand. I do think, though, a handful of these other national games will be on ABC, which I know ABC, ESPN, same company, but it does feel like when the games are on ABC, they put a little bit more gravity and effort behind them. So it feels a little bit bigger. So overall, like, this is kind of exciting. And there was something you texted me about yesterday when this came out about a lot of the matchups that happen. And it kind of feels like they're rooting for one thing to happen when it's Penguins and this team on the national stage, Hunter.
Yeah, so if you look at the games that ESPN has, at least for their national broadcast this year, so November 8 against Washington, again, this is 8 ESPN/ESPN Plus/ABC games for the Penguins this year. So November 8th against Washington, December 6th against the Rangers, February 22nd against Washington, March 1st against Boston, March 15th against New Jersey, April 5th against Dallas, April 8th against Chicago, April 17th against Washington. Pat, I have a question for you. How close are we to Alex Ovechkin breaking the goal record?
I don't have the numbers up, but he's damn close.
It's less than 45 goals away at this point. So yes, I think they are banking on that final game, that April 17th game, potentially being the game, because Ovi's a bit older at this point, where Ovechkin breaks the goal record. And also maybe the game in February if he's also having an incredible year this upcoming season. It seems like, at least to me, they're kind of looking at we don't have many Crosby Ovechkin matchups left, but B, they want to be broadcasting a Penguins Caps game nationally, especially at the end of the season, if Ovechkin has a chance to break the goal record. And doing it in Pittsburgh would obviously be crazy, just because, you ask Washington fans, Pittsburgh's their biggest rival. You ask a lot of Penguins fans. I think a lot of Penguins fans would say the same, but you also may get different answers with Philadelphia, the Islanders, the Rangers, obviously. But I do think some Penguins fans will obviously, say the Capitals. And if he were to do it in Pittsburgh, I do think it would be pretty cool. Obviously, I think you'd see in my opinion, at least, I think you'd see a raucous ovation from Pittsburgh. I really think you'd see a really good ovation from Penguins fans, considering what that record means, especially to Alex Ovechkin. Yeah, I know he's been a thorn in the Penguins side for a very long time, but you always got to respect greatness. I think Penguins fans would very much give him an ovation if that was the case, but it definitely seems like with all these national games for Penguins Caps and that one at the end of the year, they're lining it up to maybe being like, hey, if Ovechkin has a chance to break the goal record at that point, we want to be able to televise it as much as possible.
For sure. And I think you hit on what their actual logic was there early on. I think they understand that there aren't going to be very many Crosby versus Ovechkin matchups left over the next couple of years, because these guys are a lot closer to the end than they are the beginning. So they're kind of signaling to the hockey world that, hey, one of the best quote unquote rivalries is starting to wrap up. So get it while you still can. And I actually agree with you, though. If he were to do this here in Pittsburgh, it would be a huge ovation, because I know that a couple years back, both you and I were at that great game where Evgeny Malkin scored the winning goal against the Capitals. I can't remember the milestone off the top of my head, but they did congratulate Ovechkin for one of the milestones, is either points or goals, and the crowd went crazy. It wasn't, booing and jeering. It was people standing up, clapping and cheering, because let's be honest here, this city has been no stranger to hockey greatness. So we appreciate it when we see it. In the moment, sure, when it's Penguins Capitals, we see that red jersey and we see red as well, because that is a rivalry. But there has always been this unspoken respect between Penguins and Capitals fans of like, listen, I don't want to lose to you. I want to beat you every time. But damn, those guys on the other side, they are a good hockey team. Other thing I noticed about a lot of this national broadcast, one thing I'm excited to see is January 29th, we get a look at the Utah Hockey Club when the Penguins travel there. That'll be on TNT, 9:30 p.m. A lot of Penguins Rangers games as well. So even though, the Rangers, I think, are a lot closer to contention, though I have my questions about them, that rivalry has still been fairly heated, especially since that playoff series a few years ago. And even with the Penguins' recent struggles, that hasn't really applied to Rangers games. The Penguins-Rangers rivalry is pretty hot right now. And when those two teams get together, it's always good hockey. So that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And one other thing I noticed that on the opposite side of this, you got the Capitals, you got the Rangers. You know who we don't have on national TV? The Flyers. And coming up in the late aughts, in the early 2010s, as a Penguins fan, boy, did that Penguins-Flyers rivalry burn hot. And at the very least, and we talked about this a good few months ago with our friend Haley Taylor-Simon, it's kind of on ice right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, these rivalries go in cycles, right? I mean, a few years ago, I would say it was very much the Capitals number one. Now it's the Rangers. If you go back even further, it was the Flyers, especially 2012 through about maybe 2015 time and then obviously the Capitals rivalry, I think, overtook it. But for a good while there, it was Philadelphia. But they go in cycles. And I do think there's going to be a point soon where Penguins Flyers overtakes Penguins Rangers or Penguins Capitals, but it's not that right now. And that's why you're really not seeing Penguins Flyers on the Nationals stage that much. overall, being tied for the most national games despite not making the playoffs these last 2 years should show everyone that Pittsburgh is still a very strong hockey market despite not making the playoffs. I think with the ratings this city pulls in, ESPN and TNT knows it, and they want to capitalize on it, especially with a Penguins fan base that, again, I think is very much one of the best fan bases in the league. So I'm not really surprised the Penguins have 17 national games, whether it's ESPN, ABC, ESPN Plus, TNT. I prefer TNT's coverage, at least, play-by-play and commentary over ESPN, but man, I love me some Bob Wischusen on ESPN. I hope if the Penguins, for their national games on ESPN, that most of them are from Bob Wischusen's perspective, because I think he's ESPN's best play-by-play guy for hockey. No disrespect to someone like Sean McDonough. I think he was doing his best job while battling an illness during part of the playoffs, but I just think Wischusen brings a little bit more to the table for play-by-play for hockey than McDonough overall. But I'm still excited for these matchups, whether it's ESPN or TNT. You also have, Pat, the Thanksgiving showdown against Boston in Boston at the end of November. The Penguins, feels like they always play in that type of game, like right after Thanksgiving. This is not nearly close to the first time where they played in that. There's also the seasonally national game against Detroit. It feels like they always put the Red Wings against the Penguins on national TV at least once. And then obviously the opening game against the Rangers, that's on TNT. So looking at TNT's schedule and ESPN's, really no complaints overall. Maybe if you wanted Penguins Flyers, okay, sure. But, you do get some new teams in there. There's also a Penguins Maple Leafs matchup on TNT. That's going to be a lot of fun as well. But you get one against Dallas. That should be cool. New Jersey, that's another team that I feel like the Penguins really don't get a lot of national presence against, at least from a national TV perspective. You also have Crosby versus Bedard late in the season. That should be a lot of fun. So honestly, still no big complaints overall from the national schedule that was released.
For sure. And one quick programming note for that before we head to our final segment. 4 of the TNT broadcast will also be on Sportsnet Pittsburgh. That is November 13th, January 29th, March 9th, and April 13th. So that'll do it here for our second segment. When we return, some quick Friday fun before we head into the weekend, when a nice little tweet from Bleacher Report Open Ice came out a couple days ago, sparking a nice little lively debate that we're going to have here on Locked On Penguins. But before we do that, we're going to tell you about our next sponsor, and that is Gametime. You guys know me. I love going to Penguins games, and Gametime has been absolutely fantastic for that the last couple of years, helping me get in the building and finding some of the best deals. And Gametime is rolling out a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Gametime is also offering a 50% off Labor Day offer for Diamondbacks Dodgers if you are interested in that. You guys also know my personal experience from way back in the day at the old Mellon Arena. If Gametime would have existed, I would have been able to get actual tickets instead of tickets from a scalper for a row and a section that did not exist. Gametime Picks is making it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. All-in pricing, when you toggle that feature, shows you the total up front, so you aren't hit with any of those surprise fees at checkout. The seat view can get you a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And of course, there is the lowest price guarantee, where Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference should you find a better deal. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, we're back here on the Friday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp, joined as always by the illustrious Hunter Hodes. And Bleacher Report Open Ice tweeted this out a couple days ago using the tweet from a great Penguins account at Chell Penguins. The Penguins Mount Rushmore. It includes Jaromir Jagr, Mario Lemieux, Sidney Crosby, and Evgeny Malkin. Between them, 4,138 games played, 2,219 goals, 5,694 points, 10 Stanley Cup rings, 2 Calder trophies, 7 Hart trophies, 10 Ted Lindsay awards, and 15 Art Ross trophies. And in Shell Penguins' words, they said, this is without a doubt the greatest Mount Rushmore in hockey. And Shell Penguins, I'm going to cast some doubt on it. Now, I do think there is an argument that this might be the best Mount Rushmore in the history of hockey, but I think in a few years, there will be a case to say that the Edmonton Oilers have a better one. When you factor in players like Wayne Gretzky, Connor McDavid, Paul Coffey, Yari Curry, that's a pretty good one.
Did you miss Messier there, or did I not hear him for some reason?
Didn't say Messier because and this isn't to downplay Messier's time with the Oilers. I think a lot more of Messier's career in the latter half of it when he was with the Rangers, but also Gretzky and Curry, man, like that was an unbelievable connection. And Messier was unquestionably great with the Oilers. Like, I don't want people to think I'm saying he wasn't, but like when I think of that duo in those Edmonton teams, I think of Gretzky Curry more so than I do say Gretzky Messier, though Messier was great. And then, I mean, you had Paul Coffey, who at the time, you basically hadn't seen a defenseman like that since Bobby Orr. And he damn near reinvented the position when he played. And I also think, and again, I think that in time, this is going to probably fall into Edmonton's favor with how great Connor McDavid is. And if they hold on to Leon Draisaitl, like those guys are just unbelievable. The other thing I'll say about it, though, taking it back to Paul Coffey, you look at Edmonton's and it's forwards and defensemen. You look at the Penguins, it's all guys who played forward.
I'll still take that though, man. I mean,
I'm not going to sit here and say
one of the three greatest players of all time. I'll still argue that he is the greatest player of all time. Yeah, I might sound a little bit biased there, but I do think if Mario had stayed, fully healthy, I think he would have shattered Gretzky's records, in my opinion. Even my dog downstairs is disagreeing with your take.
I agree, but it's also such a tough asterisk to put on it as a Penguins fan, because it's like, I was actually having a discussion with this at work today with the tremendous legendary reporter and hockey guy, Ross Godotti. You look at Lemieux's career and everybody always says the same thing. Man, if he just could have been healthy. And he still put up video game numbers, but then you think about missing a season because of a back injury, missing all of that time battling cancer, and just the random ailments and back injuries and other injuries that Lemieux had took away from what could have been an illustrious career that left Gretzky's numbers in the dust, but that's all a hypothetical.
No, I understand. I still think Mario would have gotten those records. I still will to this day say that he is the greatest hockey player ever. Sidney Crosby, top 5 player of all time at this point.
No argument there.
He's not in my top 5. You can definitely make an argument. He's right outside of it. I know some Oilers fans will say Messier is better than Jágr. No, sorry. I don't subscribe to that notion. I understand why they do it.
Much. It's closer than you think, but I would still put Jágr over Messier, but yeah, it's a lot closer than I think people would think.
I would still take Jágr. I would give him, again, the smidges of edges with his playmaking and his goal scoring ability over Messier. And then Gino, I mean, he's a top 30 player of all time. I mean, we could say top 25. I don't know if he's in the top 20, but 25, 30, that in that range, I would say, for Malkin. So you have 4 Penguin forwards here who are top 25 to 30 all time. Yeah, I know a team like the Canadiens can also make a case, in my opinion. The Oilers, as you said, I've seen people say the Avs could make a case, but I think the Oilers and the Canadiens have a bit of a better case, but that's just my opinion. But right now, at least, I am still taking the Penguins' big 4 over anyone else. That's my opinion. I totally understand people who would take the Oilers or the Canadiens and all that stuff, but I'm taking the Penguins, man, with everything those 4 accomplished throughout their careers, and at least for 2 of the players that are still playing, what more they could accomplish, I am taking them as the best Mount Rushmore.
I can definitely get to your point and get to your side on it. I'll say this, and no offense to some of our fans who may be Canadians fans or some of the older listeners we have, but the Canadians one, it's hard for me to count because it was almost a different sport when they were really at their pinnacle. And you look at the discussion between the Penguins and the Oilers one, there's a lot more overlap into the modern era. And that's not to say that the Canadians didn't have an absolutely embarrassment of riches in some of the most iconic players that had ever played the sport. But I think it's to the point where you can say like, hey, for that era, that's the best Mount Rushmore. And then when you get into closer to the modern era, it's between the Penguins and Oilers for the most part. So I think if you look at it from essentially eras and moments in hockey, you go back to those early days, it's the Canadians in a walk. And then you get, the like late 70s, 80s, 90s into the modern era, it's the Penguins and the Oilers. So I love these discussions, and I could do them all day because it's the classic barroom discussion where you just sit down and argue about old players, or it's the meme of guys can literally sit around and name obscure players and have the best time. So yeah, I mean, give us your thoughts in the comments on social media, what you think. I have a feeling that our audience is probably going to take the Penguins, but hey, stranger things have happened. But that will do it for the Friday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to listen to our show, and Hunter and I will return with a new episode for you on Monday. But until then, for Hunter Hodes, I'm Patrick Damp. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.